All right. We had to use that music in this presentation. So thank you all for coming and for taking the time. I will try to use your time very efficiently. I appreciate it. Let's just jump right into it. First of all, let me introduce myself really quickly. I'm Professor Steve Joordens. I teach introductory psychology here at University of Toronto and also as a MOOC on Coursera. I love large classes. This is my confession to you. I like to teach to large classes. But then the challenge, of course, is within these large classes, can you still offer some very deep and meaningful learning experiences to students, the kind of experiences that will help their future success? And so we have this three-part webinar series that's really focused on this issue. Today, we're going to be focusing mostly on writing. And let me just say a little bit as we start. So I am going to go through a little bit of a formal presentation. It'll be about 20 minutes. At the same time, there is a chat window available to you so you can ask questions. Here with me are two other representatives from peerScholar, Dwayne Paré, who's a co-founder, and Tessa Mintz. They are both here to help us, help me, and they will answer questions and such. And then at the end, we will have a Q&A as well. Alrighty, cool. So today, yeah, we're going to focus on writing and how to get writing into large classes, which may sound impossible, but I hope by the end of this webinar, you'll think, maybe not. We will continue on if you're interested, and I'll just very quickly highlight that next Tuesday, we're going to talk about how to get your students working on oral presentations or other sorts of demonstrations. So giving them that feeling of being up in front of people while not being up in front of people. So we'll talk about that on Tuesday, how you can begin to develop those skills in students. And then finally, next Thursday, a week from today, we're going to be talking about how you can give students experience giving feedback and learning from feedback. And we're going to touch on that today as well, but that'll be the focus of Thursday because that's a very powerful career kind of skill to both be able to give good feedback, but also to be able to learn and adjust your behavior in accord with the feedback that you receive. Okay, so those are the topics we're going to be talking about across these seminars, but today it's all about writing. All right, so writing. Is it good to have our students write? I think we all kind of agree that yes, there's something really good about writing. Oh, by the way, I just noticed, sorry, maybe you guys are telling me this in the background, but I just noticed that I'm not here and I don't know if that matters too much. Maybe it doesn't matter. You know what, it doesn't matter. I'm not that interesting to look at. So we'll just keep the little Cognito logo there. Here's a website where Brad Hughes, who's the director for this Writing Across the Curriculum course at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, or should I say an initiative, he's talked about a lot of the benefits of the writing, and he actually highlights 12 points. I'm just going to take out these two first to really kind of stress what I think we all know is true anyway. That writing deepens thinking and it increases the student's engagement with their course material. It's an active form of learning, which we all know is fantastic. And writing assignments provide us, the faculty, with an opportunity to teach students to organize their ideas, develop their points logically, make explicit connections between bits of material, elaborate their ideas, argue points, and situate an argument in the context of previous research. And these are all skills that are very valued in higher education because they are so strongly linked to student success. Now, I want to this is the last point that Brad makes. And let me just read through it because I think it's a very important point and very relevant to this webinar. Finally, though it is much more than this, writing is a skill that atrophies when it isn't practiced regularly. Because learning to write well is difficult, and because it requires sustained and repeated practice, we need to ensure our undergraduates write regularly throughout the curriculum in all majors. It is the responsibility of all of us to ensure that our students learn to think and write clearly and deeply. And I want to kind of highlight that throughout the curriculum. This may seem like a grandiose idea that students would go from course to course and continually be asked to write. But we know from skill learning that that is the way they will learn the skill. And so the question is, can we do this? If this sounds like a great thing to do, then we should do this, right? But do we do this? Well, we don't. We don't use writing assignments that much. And especially in our very large, which are often our first year courses. And I want to highlight the first year nature because it's in the first year where we kind of set the standards for students. We kind of let them know what we value at a university. And if we're not including writing in our large first year courses, it's kind of giving students the wrong message. And so it would be really great to use writing. Why don't we? Well, we all kind of know the answer to that. If you're going to ask students to do an activity and that takes a lot of time on their part and a lot of effort, then they're going to want to have that activity graded. And more than that, they're going to rightfully want some feedback on their writing. They want the opportunity to learn what they're doing well, what they're not doing well. And while this is perfectly reasonable, when it's a very large class, the time and resources that we need to grade and provide feedback at this scale are simply too much. Okay, that's, I believe, the only reason we're not using a lot more writing in our courses. It just seems logistically and resource-wise impossible to do. So what this highlights to us is that if we're going to try to come at this challenge with innovation, this is a point we really have to keep in mind. Yes, writing is good. Yes, we want to bring it back, but we have to find a way to do so that respects the fact that the faculty already have a lot on their plate, and therefore any solution has to be easy to use and has to minimize its demands on faculty time. And so I'm going to suggest to you today that there is a solution that fits this very well, that in fact gives students not only writing experience, but extremely powerful writing experience, and that it does so in ways that are easy for the faculty to use, enjoyable for the faculty and for the students, and in fact, as we'll discuss in a moment, they can be respectful of the resources that are or are not available within a particular context. Okay, so what is this solution? What is this innovation? It's something called peerScholar. peerScholar is a peer assessment platform, an online peer assessment platform. It's now used we've had over 60,000 students use it, 6 countries, primarily Canada, but over 60 different institutions are now using peerScholar, which is really heartening for us. It's really great to see it used. This is just a sampling of some of the institutions that are using it. Let me just tell you how it works. Let's just make it concrete, and I'll actually show you peerScholar in action in just a moment. Before I show it to you in action, let me give you sort of a mile-high view of the process that it uses, and then we'll get into the nuts and bolts a little bit. All right, so peerScholar supports a 3-step process. The first step we call the create phase, and in this phase, students simply create some composition in accord with the instructions provided by a faculty member. So that faculty member provides the specific details of what they would like the students to produce, and they can also attach any resources they want to attach or link out to anything they want to link out, anything they think might help the student prepare their composition. But aside from that, it's relatively traditional. Students go ahead and create that composition, and in the context of today's mini webinar, let's think of that as a written composition that they're doing. So students would go out and would actually just write something. Okay. Now, here's where it gets a little interesting. Students have all written something, they all submit something, they go to step 2, which is the assess phase. In this phase, we are going to show students some of the compositions that their peers submitted. A randomly selected set. For this case, let's talk about 5 peers, say 5 or 6, but let's say 5. So let's say they're going to see 5 of their peers' work randomly selected, anonymously presented, and we tell students, you're going to play a teacher's role now. We want you to look at each of these peer compositions, and we want you to rate it, to assess it in accord with instructions I will give you, and to ultimately provide constructive feedback to each peer. So you're going to do this for peer 1 and then continue on for every peer. okay, which is a very rich learning experience. And I'll talk about that more when you see it. But for now, they're assessing their peers' work. Now, as they're assessing their peers' work, an equal number of peers are assessing their work. So in the final phase, students see the feedback that was attached to their work, and now they can be asked to do a number of things with it. They at the very least, should be asked to assess that feedback, and you can guide that assessment. So you can show them how to kind of look at feedback and get the most out of it. And they can do that by directing them to look for certain things in their assessment. And so now, of course, they're going to have, in the example, I gave 5 pieces of feedback. So they go one by one and they assess that feedback. They can also be asked, once they've done that, to submit a revision, a final revision. So now they're using the feedback formatively to guide their final product. And if they know that final product is where most of the marks are going to be, well, now they're strongly encouraged to learn as much as they can from the feedback, use it as well as they can to produce their final report. So let's, just to make that a little more clear, let's skip over to the demo real quick. This is going to be a high-level demo. If you would like a more detailed demo, reach out to us. We would love to give you a much more detailed one. But for now, students would log in. They would see any courses. And let's say in this research ethics course, they've been given a writing activity. They're supposed to write about the research ethics of animal versus human research. So maybe we're asking them to create an argument. So they would first come into the create phase. They would see the instructions that were there. And they could read through them. And notice, by the way, in the instructions, you can include things like videos. You can embed whatever you want. So full digital range. Here we have a rubric attached, etc. So they would read through those instructions, say, okay, I know what I have to do. And relatively simple here. They have a box in which they can paste things. I didn't mean to just paste the word peerScholar. I, in fact, had a whole composition there. I'm not going to scramble around and get that composition back. But suffice it to say that within this box, they could just, write whatever they want. And they can also, by the way, do all sorts of neat things in terms of submitting videos or images or tables, etc. So a full-featured editor where they can go ahead and compose their piece here or copy and paste it in. They can also be allowed to attach other documents to their work if you think that's part of your activity. But again, that's essentially it. They're submitting a composition, okay? So they've done that. The whole class has done that. They go to the assess phase. So again, they enter the assess phase. They see instructions, and these instructions are basically saying, hey, okay, it's your turn to be the teacher now. And they kind of walk the students through the process that they will be asked to complete. So the students read through that. Okay, they got it. And now what they see are the submissions from, in this case, 5 different peers. And for each peer, they have a couple of ways of giving feedback. I'm just going to slip that down. So one is you already see some of these things in yellow. This would be an example of a student who's kind of coming back to work that they've already done a little bit on. So you can pick any part of this and you can add a comment and attach it directly to the text. So for example, this one suggested should have a stronger opening sentence. This one suggests, here's an example that you might want to do something with. So you can select any text and attach comments directly to it. But to the right here is a much more formal assessment form. And this assessment form, the instructor builds themselves with some very simple tools. So it's a very easy to do process. In this case, the instructor has asked the student to first rate the quality of the piece. So they enter a rating. They've created a matrix here that the student can use to map with that rubric. So they can look at the rubric. They can consider this piece. And in this case, for example, it was a rubric about what makes something a good argument. So these are the sort of 5, subparts of a good argument. So the student can be directed to look and see how clear these things are, and then can ultimately indicate their ratings on a matrix. And then most importantly, the student is asked to give some constructive feedback to the peer. So just to be clear about this, my typical example would say, look at this work, think of all the ways it could be better, then zero in on the one thing that if changed, you think that would be the maximum, that would make the maximum improvement. What is that one thing? Describe what that thing is to the peer and give them some sense about how they can go ahead and improve their work with respect to that thing. Okay, so that's what students, the one thing you could improve, etc. And so they can write that constructive comment there. So let me just kind of put on my pedagogical geek hat for a moment here and just say that when they're doing this, they're thinking about writing in a different way. Yes, they originally produced something, and producing something is exercising their writing skills, but now they're analyzing the work of a peer, and they don't usually get to do this at all in our education system, but this is like ear training in music. They're actually looking for attributes of good writing in the work of others. So they're analyzing this critically, they're exercising their communication skills when they communicate back to the student, but most importantly, they're really seeing different examples of writing, because they will do this all for peer 1, of course, then they will do it for peer 2, then they will do it for peer 3, etc. So as they go through, they see examples, some of which are probably better than their work, some of which are not as good, and so they're getting a real clear sense of where their writing skill is now, and they're also seeing examples that guide them about how their writing could be better. So this peer assessment phase is not just, giving them experience writing, but it's a much richer kind of two-sided experience of learning how to write better. You'll also, by the way, if you notice, the last one is my work. Now, it looked like I just typed a couple of things. If I would have pasted in what I planned to paste in, it would have looked like this monolithic block with no paragraphs. That was going to be my sign to you that this was my writing. Hopefully, if one of my peers sees this, they'll tell me to add paragraphs. But the idea here is, after they've gone through all their peers' work and analyzed their writing, you can then say, okay, now look at your own. And you may notice that my assessment form is a little different here. You can guide them to look at their own work a little differently and consider their learning. So now we're adding what's called self-assessment to really bring home that learning that they're getting from looking at their peers. Okay, so again, I want to keep going relatively quickly. So they submitted a composition. Now they engaged in all this really deep analysis of their peer compositions. While they were doing this with 5 peers were doing it with their work. And so in the final step, they again come in, they again see instructions about what to do. I'm just going to jump right to what they do. Now here's this monolithic block. So this is my work. What we're seeing here is what this peer thought of my work. So this peer gave me a 6. By the way, notice everything's anonymous. That makes the peer assessment and feedback work a lot better. So this peer gave me a 6. Here's the rubric ratings they gave me, and here's their feedback that they're giving me. So one of the things that we do is ask them to assess the feedback. Now, I've already assessed this person's feedback, so I'm going to go to 2, 3. There's somebody I haven't assessed their feedback. No? I've assessed everybody's feedback already. Nice. Okay, so what would normally happen here, though, is before you assess their feedback, you're given this button down here, and when you press it, a pop-up comes up with some questions about that feedback. And again, the instructor can very easily create these questions. And in my case, for example, I usually ask them to rate how useful the feedback was. And then I also give them a checklist of emotions and ask them how this feedback made them feel. And so I'm trying to teach them to separate out the emotionality of somebody criticizing your work, which might not make you feel good, from the utility. Are they actually saying things that are helpful? And so you can teach them how to do that, how to separate the emotion and the utility, how to hone in on the utility and figure out, is this person giving me good advice? And then once they do that, for 5 peers, then they... once they do that for 5 peers, then they can have the option to revise their work. So once they've actually gone through and thought about how their work could be better, they can be asked to revise it. Okay, cool. All right, so that's the sense of the process. So now I just want to go through really this one last major point. Okay, that all sounds well and good, but let's return to this issue of resources. And by resources, I mean both money and the instructor's time. we have a cool tool that really enriches the writing process, but how does it map onto these processes? Well, there's different ways to now give students feedback and grades based on what they've just seen. So one is sort of the traditional way. You can have an expert go back in after the fact and provide grades and comments. And the cool thing is, of course, they can grade all sorts of things now, like the feedback that's given. They can guide how well somebody revised their work, all sorts of information they have. When this is done, we find it takes about 12 minutes per student, which is about how long it takes to grade a normal essay. So you get a whole lot more learning without any more resource costs. But here's the really interesting thing. You can also use the peer averages. When any piece has been marked by 5 or more peers, there's a lot of research from our lab and from other labs showing that the average of those peer assessments is in fact perfectly in line with TA given grades. And so now you can actually use that peer average for the quality of the work or the peer average for the quality of the feedback, and you can get the grading done this way with no need for anybody no expert to actually be involved, which is very cool. You also, by the way, have the notion of what we call the quality hybrid. And just to give you a real quick example, what one professor we know does, they have 6 written assignments. At the end of the 6 written assignments, they randomly pick 1 or 2, and those 1 or 2 will be graded by an expert. Those expert grades end up being worth a little bit more than the pure average grades, but by this hybrid model, students are getting 6 experiences, 6 very rich experiences writing, and you only have to put the resources to grade 2 of them, and it works really, really well. So, you know, that's an example of how with some creativity, you can really make the most of resources. And of course, when it comes to the professor's time, we've really worked very hard to make peerScholar very easy to use. So setup is very quick. You can oversee the process as it's going on, but you don't have to get involved. And so it's the kind of thing that can scale very quickly within a university because it doesn't make huge demands on the professor. Okay, so sort of the final points I want to leave you with. We started by saying writing is a good thing, and we'd like to have more of it. It is a good thing. It's even a better thing when you add peer assessment, and even a better thing when you add a self-assessment, and even better when you're using formative feedback. So by incorporating writing in this context, we're really supercharging the learning experience for students. That's fantastic. If we look on the faculty and the institution side, we're doing this in a way that's very respectful of the time of faculty, and easy to use application that they can get up and running very quickly, lots of support if they need it, and once they do it once or twice, it's just easy. They know what they're doing. It's not a problem. Also respectful of resources. This, by the way, for the non-Canadians in the audience, is something we call a toonie in Canada. It's our $2 coin, goes along with our $1 coin, which we call the loonie. That's what we're like in Canada. So at any rate, it's respectful of resources that are available. So mostly that's what I wanted to say. I want to stress that this is possible. You can have as many writing assignments as you want, even in your very large classes. And we are here to help you get started. So if this is something that you find interesting, if you'd like to use it in the summer, reach out to us. We will help you get going, help you get set up. And if you have any questions at all, if you would like a demo or anything further, we would love to chat with you. info@peerscholar.com. Okay, I am going to shut up now and look at the questions you guys have been asking. So I've seen some things popping up, but things have been all right. I didn't want to mess anything up, to be honest. So I'm now going to look at your questions and chat away. I feel like I would like to give you my, oh, here we go. Let me see if there we are. Stop video. Oh, maybe my video is showing. I don't see video. Anyway, what is large in your context? With me, it's 600 to 800. Well, my normal course is 1,700, and I'm sorry, the Americans that may be in the audience, I know 17, yeah, there we go, 1,700. But really, they're saying anything over 50, but in reality, as soon as, well, let me be even more extreme. In a 20-student class, you're usually trying to get 3 students to shut up and the others to interact. So even in a small class, everybody is being asked to get fully involved in the process from both the writing perspective and the analysis of writing. And so it really can benefit any class, but certainly it'll work even in a very rich class. It kind of takes a 1,700 student class and turns it into a bunch of 6 student interactions, you know, almost a Socratic-like interaction between these students. I was wondering how the system handles the peer grades in those instances where a student did not receive all 5 peer reviews. So, I mean, the reality is the peer average is you know, the more peers that feed into it, the more you can trust it to a point. Peer fatigue comes into place. So our research has suggested that by the time you hit 5 or 6, you're at a TA level of, you know, consistency of grades. If you get a little less, well, then you've got a little bit of noise in your grading. So, you know, if you're going to use that, I would suggest that you pick 6, let's say, and if you pick 6, and as long as your students are you know, reasonably good at doing the assessments, everybody will receive at least 5 or 6 reviews, and you would be fine. Can you integrate it into an LMS? Absolutely. For the geeks out there, it's what's called LTI 2.0, which means it integrates easily into virtually every LMS that's out there now, and I think we have integrated with virtually every LMS, certainly Blackboard. We've used it, by the way, in my class in Toronto for 10 years or more, and it was integrated in Blackboard. We've recently changed the Canvas, and so it's now integrated in Canvas, but it works perfectly well there as well. Any other questions? We got 3 minutes left. I felt like I was kind of flying there, but it was fun. Okay, well, let me just give you my direct email address as well. So if you have questions about peerScholar or the peerScholar platform, feel free to use info@peerScholar. Whoops, that just went out privately, didn't it? Sorry, I'm just going to do this again. If you have any questions you want to ask of me specifically, then please feel free to reach out to me directly as well. That's my email address. You typically have students complaining about other students' assessments of their work. It's always good to do a little bit of, I don't know, just explaining to the students why you're asking them to do what you're doing. Maybe even, you know, giving some of the research that shows how powerful effect it has on learning. But certainly, what your typical students will see is that some of the assessments of their work aren't very good, and some are very good. And that's sort of the beauty of peer assessment, because now the student has to really deeply consider each piece of feedback they receive and decide for themselves whether they think it's helpful or not. So we're really engaging critical thinking when they receive this feedback, and what I call receptive communication. They're learning to listen and think about what they're listening to. And it's almost always the case that students find, you know, 2 or 3 things that are helpful. So no, they don't complain about the students' assessments. They, in survey after survey, they say they learned a lot from seeing the work of other students, and they learned a lot from the comments they received, and they feel the comments that they received when they're given the opportunity to revise have helped them improve their work for that revision. So there is no student rebellion, despite the fact that this is requiring a lot of them, right? It's really driven by the students, which is why it's so friendly on the faculty side. It's the students that are driving the work, they're engaged, they're owning that whole learning experience, and they enjoy it. And so survey after survey shows that they enjoy the experience, they value the experience, and they would like to see it in more classes. So yeah, it's one that students accept. Also, by the way, let me just say quickly on the faculty side, U of T has had the sort of longest history of using the platform since it kind of came out of U of T here, University of Toronto, and we've seen it grow to the point where it's now used in over 60 courses, I think a term here at U of T, 40 to 60 courses a term at U of T, and that's with very little promotion. As faculty learn about this, it's very easy to scale use within an institution as well. So individual faculty members can use it if they wish. Institutions can use it as well as they wish. And we are just really happy to partner with anybody that's passionate about enhancing student learning and to work with you to help your students be as successful as they can be. That's really what drives us. So if we have that opportunity with any of you guys, that would be very cool, and we really appreciate it. Any other questions or thoughts before we sign off? I will mention again here at the end that there's 2 more of these. Next Tuesday again, we'll be having one that's based on giving your students some practice learning how to present orally, even in a class like my 1,700 student class. I've done that a number of times. And then in the 3rd webinar, we're really going to focus on the feedback aspect, the power that there is in sort of scaffolding how they give feedback, and how that really gives them the tools they need to be very successful when they leave our university. So if those things are interesting to you, I'll see you again next Tuesday and next Thursday, and please feel free to share these links with anybody else you think might be interested. Thank you very much. I think with that, we will sign off. I see a little QA here with a little thing on it. Thanks. Oh, Suzanne, thank you. Fantastic. Great. Have a great day, everybody, and a great long weekend. Bye-bye.